you for coming. This is going to be the last series on the stories of creation that we have been talking about during the last months. Yeah. Just to remind ourselves, we're talking about the first 5 chapters of my book, which is the Poetic Reason. It's a panoptic view, an inquiry into the divine using all the tools that we have available: science, history, art, trying to deconstruct what the divine is. And so, because we are culminating our conversation on the stories of creation, I want to go back a little bit. I don't know if you've watched I would say it was the first lecture on this series. It was called The Sacred and the Profane. And in that lecture, we met a young girl called Alice. Here you can imagine Alice as being a temporal girl living anywhere on Earth. It doesn't have to be any particular period of time. It doesn't have to be any particular place. It's just someone who has a curious mind and wonders about the world that she lives in. Alice, by the way, is this little girl. Yeah? This is why everything has a reason. Almost everything has a reason. Well, this is Alice looking at the stars and wondering what's the deal with the stars. So here is Alice, right? And in this lecture, what I mentioned is that Alice has basically 3 fundamental questions about the nature of the universe. First of all, the first question that she asks is, where did all of this come from? And she very quickly notices how the sun, for example, exerts a very powerful presence in her world, right? So there is something that is out of her reach that she calls the sacred or the divine. One second, let me quickly look that I'm recording. Yeah, okay, sorry. So there is this this part of the world that is called the sacred or the divine, and that she doesn't have an access to. The second question that she asks is, okay, what's my place in the cosmos? I see that there are all of these weird powers moving the gears of the cosmos. I'm not part of that. I'm here. So what's my place in the cosmos? And that's when she says, okay, then there's another part to the world that is called the profane. Something that we could define basically as just not being divine. Is the world that we live here and that we can touch, the tree that she's sitting next to, right? The animals that she sees. This is the profane. Naturally, the third question that she asks is, well, if there are these 2 realms of existence, do they interact with each other? Can the profane interact with the divine in some way? And I believe that these are so basic questions that almost everyone in humanity during the eons have asked themselves, right? And I believe that these are the fundamental ingredients of the stories that we have been talking about. Because now we're going to recap. We're going to re-study everything we have been talking about. And I want you to think about the 3 questions that Alice has asked. So here we have blank canvas, the arrow of time. It only moves in one direction. And I'm going to start placing different events that we have been talking about in this arrow of time to organize our thoughts. First of all, 2,100 years before Christ, more or less, we have the Sumerian symbol here, right? The Akkadian scripture that we talked about. We had fun with the other time with the clay. Here is the Gilgamesh story, roughly appears around 2,100 BC. Then we also had a lecture, if you remember, at the other side of the arrow, here around 1,100 AD, when we talked about the Poetic Edda and the Norse myths. And here you can see the symbol of Odin, right? So actually, because the time scale is so large, I will need to cut the axis here. Because the Sumerian stories are so old, it's unbelievable. As I told you, 2,100 years before Christ, for the Romans, it was as old for the Romans as the Romans are for us. It's unbelievable amount of time, 4,000 years ago. So let's see. We have the Enuma Elish, and this is the actual story of creation that we talked about the previous time. Approximately, it's hard to date, 1,200 BC. Then in 730 before Christ, here I have a new symbol. And you can imagine that this is the lightning of someone called Zeus. Yeah? Hesiod's Theogony, that's the poem that we talked about in the Greek cosmogony. And these are all the creation myths from the Greek tradition. As I say, 730 BC, more or less around the time that Homer is writing. Yeah? So Hesiod and Homer are more or less contemporaneous. Then what do we have? Another symbol appears here, the Star of David. And here I have labeled this short period of time of around 60 years with the Babylonian captivity, starting around 600 BC, ending in 540 BC. That's the period of time that we ended our last conversation with. It's the period of time when Nabucodonosor, right, the Babylonian king, basically sends all the Jews to Babylon in a policy of scorched earth, basically. So he destroys the temple in Jerusalem, and the Jews are forced, exiled into Babylonia, Babylon. That's the period of time that we talked about the last time. By the way, I tried to make the scales proportional, more or less. Yeah. So if you actually look at the pixels, you will see that it's almost there. Okay, done my best. 399, another very important event, Socrates' death. And do you know the story about Socrates' death? Have you read about it? It's there is a trilogy of dialogues from Plato, the Apologia, Crito, and Phaedo. I think it's interesting to mention the death of Socrates. Socrates, so basically what do we have here? So after the Persian Wars, Greece wins, right? So we have then the period of Pericles, the ruler of Athens, and that's when the Parthenon is built, etc., etc. It's a period of the great plays and the playwrights. But then, as everything in life, Athens falls into decay after the war with the Spartans in the Peloponnesian War, right? The Spartans win, and then basically Athens is just a shadow of what it used to be. Okay, so that we're nearing ourselves to the year 400. There is a government with the 30 tyrants. So Athenian democracy, as I say, is lingering. Yeah. So you have a guy that is an older guy that is telling everyone in Athens, well, you should look into yourself. He's reminding every Athenian of their stupidity. Yeah, and the Athenians do not like this. And they say that Socrates is corrupting the youth by not believing in the gods of the time, etc. Right? And they judge him. Yeah, there are 500 judges, and they judge him. And the first thing they tell him is that, well, you're a wise man, you have good friends, you have rich friends. Set a monetary punishment. So set some bail, yeah, pay it, and you will be free. And he says, no, I don't want any debts. That's what he says. And then they judge him again, so they go again at him, and they say, well, now we're going to judge you to death. Yeah? And that's where you have Plato explains the account of the death of Socrates in the Dialogue of the Phaedo. And basically, so the story goes now that Socrates is in his cell, and his friends are surrounding him, and he is about to take the hemlock, cicuta. Cicuta hemlock is a plant. Yeah? It kills you almost instantly. Now, this is also interesting to see that they gave him hemlock, a honorable method of dying, because otherwise the Athenian city would not spend a single dime on someone who had violated the law. Yeah? They would just rot in their cell, and after 5 days they would die of thirst. That's it. Yeah. But this hemlock, that was something honorable. Yeah. And what are Socrates' last words? I think it's a very interesting discussion. Do you know anything about Socrates' last words? Well, the dialogue ends, and Socrates is about to die. He has taken the cicuta, and he starts feeling that it's taking some effect. Okay, and so he asks for a blanket. He puts a blanket on, and he's about to die. But before he dies, he tells to his friend Crito, "Crito, you owe a cock, a chicken, to Asclepius." And then he covers himself and he dies. What's the point of this? And now it's when we will relate it to our discussion. A lot of conversations have been had throughout history about the last words of Socrates. No one really knows why Plato wrote those words. Maybe he was just kidding with us. One of the most famous takes on these words, I would say, are Nietzsche. Nietzsche talks about this in Gay Science, in one of his hundreds of aphorisms. It's not my favorite book, I have to say. Disclaimer, it's not one of my favorite books. But I think what he says in the aphorism that Socrates mentioned this because he was grateful to Asclepius for healing him from life. Yeah? So life is not worth living, and that's why he says, give a cock to Asclepius because I'm getting rid of this sickness that is life. No. I think Nietzsche got it wrong. I don't think that a character like Socrates would think like that. There is another version that I like much more, and I owe it to Antonio Escotado. He was a philosopher in Spain, super famous philosopher. He says that in another instance, 20 years before, Socrates was walking with his friend Crito, and then he saw people offering cogs, chicken, and other wealths to the god of Asclepius. The god Asclepius is the god of medicine. Yeah? And Socrates told Crito, well, look at these people, superstitious. Yeah? They think that by offering the god this sort of gifts, they will have a healthy life. Yeah? How ridiculous is it? Yeah? And Crito tells him, well, I want to see you in your deathbed, whether you will also want to offer a cock to Asclepius in order to heal you, and so you don't die. I said, okay. If I'm not superstitious at the moment when I die, then you owe a cock to Asclepius, not me. Yes, and I think that's a much more interesting story, right? Because, yeah, Socrates. What is the teaching of Socrates when he dies? Our life is, I would say, what is the defining characteristic of our life, or the defining mission of our life, is our instinct of survival. We need to survive. We got to do everything there is in our hand to survive, right? And that makes a lot of sense. But when death starts showing its face, when death starts to say, hey, I'm here, and it's not going to be long before I come to you, the instinct of survival doesn't make any sense. Instead, we need to replace it with an instinct of farewell. That's what I believe Socrates is telling us. Yeah? It doesn't make any sense to go to the god and say, but please, I'm about to die. Can't you just do something else? 1 more year, 2 more years. No. The point is that he dies with his blanket alone, and he tells his friend, you owe a cock to Asclepius because I'm ready. I'm not going to be the superstitious man that you thought I would be. why did I spend some minutes talking about this? Because isn't that the essence, one of the essence of religion, right? To say, well, if you pray enough, if you're behaving good things will happen to you. Well, it's difficult, yeah? So I think that the death of Socrates is wonderful teaching, yeah? At least in this interpretation, okay? I don't want to interpret it like Nietzsche. I'm not so nihilist. And I also like the death of Socrates much more than the death of Seneca. The death of Seneca is much worse, I would say. Basically, Nero suicides him, if you know what I mean. Yeah, and before he dies, he says, "But everyone is weeping. The women there are weeping. Say, oh, but what are we going to do without you?" And he basically says, "I've been a virtuous man. Don't wait for me. Don't wait for me." That's it. Oh no. Anyway, very interesting. I wanted to share with you if you haven't heard it. Any other place. We move on. 4th BC, birth of Jesus. Paradoxical, right? That Jesus wasn't born on the 0th. That has an explanation. We will get to it in the future. It has to do with the Roman census and people counting the years wrong. Then we have 622 is Muhammad's Hijrah, yeah? From Mecca to Medina. Yeah? Right, these are many different events in the time axis. And now what I want to do is I want to relate the stories, the metaphysics, let's say, of the stories that we have been looking at. We have here the story of creation. If you remember, we talked about the waters of chaos. So in the Babylonian world, in the Babylonian story, the world is created out of water. These waters that are mixed, and that there are 2 demons. Yes. Then we also talked about the hierarchy. So the chief of the gods needs to defeat chaos in order to be at the top of the hierarchy. And then we also saw how men and women actually are created from clay. Okay, so waters of chaos, hierarchy, and clay. Then the Greek story of creation. We also have chaos. It's the nothing. Nothing. There is nothing. There is darkness. And out of there come all of these gods. We also talked about the hierarchy. So Saturn, when he, or Cronus, when he wants to become the boss, has to deal with his father Uranus. And when Zeus wants to become the boss, he has to deal with Saturn, yeah? With Cronus, sorry. I'm Roman, sorry. And so the hierarchy plays a very important role. And we connected this hierarchical component of the story of creation to our own world. To say, well, if you want to be the boss of anything, if you want to be the king, you need to demonstrate that you are worth it. That you are willing to contain the waters of chaos that may not be waters themselves, but maybe diseases, maybe wars, maybe famines, right? And then we also saw that Prometheus builds us out of clay, and Athena breathes the spirit into us. Elements that are very similar, yeah, between the 2 cosmogonies. Then we jump and we go into the Nordic creation, and we saw how there is also a form of chaos, that this doesn't have water but has a primordial abyss. We also see the tree of life, that is the main component, and we talked a lot about the tree of life because it makes a lot of sense that the Nordic peoples thought that the world was a tree because we're surrounded by trees. And then it makes also a lot of sense that they put a lot of thought into their eschatology. So what happens after the world ends? Because we have a self-evident eschatological cycle also throughout the year, when the sun disappears now in December and then reappears in June. So that's a very powerful event that needs explaining. And all of these people don't have the scientific method, so they need to do it one way or another. Where is the book of Genesis here? Where was it written? What do the sources say? Maybe it surprises you to see that it's here. It's around the time of the death of Socrates, and this is why I placed it here also. Okay, the book of Genesis is approximately written in 400 BC. I want you to look at all of this. It's written here, okay? It's written after the Jews have stayed with the Babylonians for 40 years. It's written before all of these stories, especially these ones, the Sumerian stories. I want you to remember this, okay? This is quite surprising, I would say. Right. So now let's jump into the Bible itself. Now we finally made it. We have been through the Poetic Edda. We have been through the Theogony of Hesiod. We have studied the Numa Elish. Well, this is the most important book in history, most influential book, the most translated. It was the first one printed, right, with Gutenberg. So what is it about? What's the Bible about? Well, the word Bible just means book. So it's a book of books. Right. For Christians, there are the Christian Bible. I will be focusing on the Christian Bible. We have the Old Testament, 39 books, and the New Testament, 27 books. The New Testament, of course, is after the birth of Jesus and the Gospel of Jesus. So here are the 5 first books, the Pentateuch, the books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Then we have a lot of history here. And if I'm not wrong, the story that I told you about the writing on the wall in Babylon, etc., that's Daniel somewhere. And here is Daniel, actually, major prophet, okay? So we have a lot of history. We have the major prophets. We have the books of wisdom. I will give a lecture on the books of wisdom because they are so interesting. They're so potent. And especially I will give a lecture about the 3 books of wisdom, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. These books have had an enormous influence on Judaism and, of course, Christianism, but on the popular thought even. So these books of wisdom talk about how to be a good person and how to... But they also talk about the problems of religion that we're going to mention in the next series of lectures. Anyway, so then you have the Gospels, 4 Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Synoptic means the same optic in Greek. It means that they are alike. Yeah? The Gospel of John, it's a bit more esoteric, we would say, but equally interesting. And then we have all the story, basically the early story of the church here, with all of these letters from Paul, etc., etc. Right? So this is more or less an overview of the Bible. The Old Testament was written in Old Hebrew, and the New Testament in Greek, yeah? Koine Greek. It was the lingua franca at the time. Right. So now that we have reviewed the previous stories of creation and that we know the book or book of books that we're talking about, let's jump into what does the Bible say. Let's try to deconstruct this. Okay? The waters of chaos. This is a very famous sentence. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And just from the first sentence, there is a lot to unpack. Okay? As I say, anyone can do this, and I would love it that religious people would also do this, to examine their faith and what it's saying. Okay? Let's deconstruct this step by step. In the beginning, start. This means that the world had a beginning. It's not trivial. Not trivial. Why isn't the world eternal? Yeah? In the beginning, it means that before the beginning, if that's an even valid statement, nothing existed. But there was something already existing that was transcendental. It means that transcends our reality, yes? So there was something existing before the world that one day had nothing better to do than to create the world. Okay? So we see that God is transcendental. It means that it extends our reality. As I say, He created, right? So there is a component of change. We have ex nihilo, yeah? So from nothing, there was nothing, and then suddenly there is something, so there is a change there. And then we say the heaven, the sacred, and the earth, the profane. Obviously, yeah? Obviously. You remember what I told you in the beginning, that Alice realized that there is a world that she cannot access and a world that she can touch, obviously. So that's the source for the sacred and the profane. Good. Good. Very good. How does God create the world, actually? How? Well, John, I told you about John, one of the Gospels, very famous sentence as well. The first sentence of the Gospel of John, it says, in the beginning was the Word, the Logos, you can see it here, the Logos, and the Word was with God. And the Word was God. So God creates the universe, He speaks the universe, you could say. Yeah? That's the Word of God. And what is speaking? Speaking is a manifestation of thought. When I have an idea, I have to speak it to you. Otherwise, how would you know? Right? So He speaks, just like we explain our ideas, speak, yeah? With words. You could think also written. Doesn't matter, you're using words. Otherwise, how would you do it? So it makes a lot of sense. He speaks the world, and that means that He had a will, right? He had a will, He created the world. What I wonder is what He was doing before that, but okay, maybe that's not a valid question. This is the first sentence. So we have deconstructed and we have seen all the different elements that we have been talking about until now. The sacred, the profane, that the world has a start and there is some sort of transcendental agent here that decides to create the world. Interesting. Let's try to deconstruct it a little bit more. And let's look at this subject, right? The object is us, the heaven and the earth. But what about the subject? What does the Bible actually tell us about the subject? Actually, when you go into the scriptures and you read them in Old Hebrew, not that I know Hebrew, but there are dictionaries, you see that God here is this word, read it like this, it's Elohim. And Elohim is not the same word as the one that maybe you're used to seeing when you enter into churches. When you enter into some churches, look up. Here in the German church, actually, you can see it. When you go into the church and you look up, you will see these 4 letters. Yeah? The tetragrammaton. In Greek, just means 4 letters. Tetragrammaton. And that's Yahweh. Yahweh doesn't have any vowels here. Yahweh, which just means Lord. The King James Bible translated as Lord. It's completely different, actually. What is the difference between Elohim and Lord? Here it's Elohim, okay? Well, Elohim just means, when I talk about my dad, for example, when I say to my friends at school, Dad is going to pick me up from school. Well, they understand that it's my dad, not their dad. But my friends also call their dad, yes? But they understand somehow that it's not their dad, but it's my dad. John, let's say. Yeah? John is different from Bob, okay? So Elohim just means like dad. It's like dad created the world, yeah? It doesn't mean that, the word itself, but it has this meaning of, yeah, this being, this divine being, yeah, that cares for us. Lord is the proper name. Yahweh is the proper name of Elohim. So my dad, we share the word dad with everyone else, but John is my dad. Okay, so that's the proper name. I'm putting some emphasis in this because as we move on, you will see that the Bible itself changes from one term to another. Yeah, and the God that reveals Himself on a burning bush to Moses is Yahweh, because Moses asks him, "What should I call you?" And God just replies, "I am who I am," which means you just gotta know that I am, I exist. I don't have any name. Yeah? And that's the deal with Yahweh. Yeah? And in many verses in the Bible, you will see that actually they refer to the two names indistinguishably. Here I picked one that uses the two words. Yeah. So the Lord is our God is one Lord. Okay. So John is my dad. That's basically what it's saying. Yeah. It's very interesting. Now notice how Yahweh, which some later religious interpreters tried to vocalize, and they interpolated some vowels there, and they call him Jehovah. Yeah? Jehovah, like the Jehovah Witnesses. Well, they are just trying to interpolate this name, yeah? Jehovah, Jehovah. But it doesn't have any vowels because Hebrew doesn't have any vowels. Yeah. But it doesn't make too. It's not too problematic, I would say. Can you read this sentence without any vowels? Maybe it's a bit difficult. I will help you. Cherish those who seek the truth, but beware of those who found it. It's not too difficult. Yeah? I couldn't trace this quote exactly, but maybe Voltaire, maybe André Gide. Interesting sentence, yeah? I don't know if if I chose this at random or not. Cherish those who seek the truth, but beware of those who find it. A cautionary tale, yeah? Right, so we have talked about the first line of the Bible, then we have talked about this subject, God. Okay? How does this continue? We could say a lot about this, by the way, yeah? I mean, creating two different realms means that there's a hierarchy as well, yeah? And necessarily, if, there is something that is good and something that is not that good, and basically you want to aspire to something that is good, right? We could talk about this for a long time, but let's move on. And the earth was without form and void, yeah? We have seen this, it's the chaos, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. I'm not suggesting any actual connections, yeah, between these mythologies, but you see that the themes are there. Without form and void. We have seen this in the Greek mythology and basically all other mythologies. There's nothing, yeah, in the beginning. And darkness also, and the deep. Well, we saw that the Poetic Edda liked very much the idea of the primordial abyss. And not only that, but a deep, you look down and basically, no, it's an abyss, basically. And who liked this very much? The Babylonians, right? And what happens in the next line? And the Spirit of God, so it's telling us that God is a spirit, it's not material like us, moved upon the face of the what? What is it? The waters! The waters! Who could have guessed? Who could have guessed that it was the waters again? Remember, this is written centuries, even maybe 1 millennium after the Babylonian cosmogony, and we talked about the waters extensively in the Babylonian cosmogony. So yeah, what a coincidence that it's the world is created and it's created out of the waters, yeah? The waters are already there. But this doesn't mention anything about serpents, right? Do you see any reference to serpents here? No. He just created the world out of nothing, and there are waters there in the abyss, but no monsters. And then God starts to create the world and blah, blah, blah. There are no monsters, so okay. Why? Because God is all-powerful. The God of the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims is an absolute God. He doesn't need to demonstrate anything to anyone. He doesn't need to kill any serpent to be at the top of the hierarchy, right? Or does he? Because maybe what some people actually don't know is that if you actually read the Bible, you can find these verses here, and I will read them to you. Thou rulest the raging of the sea, all right, we are seeing that. When the waves thereof arise, thou stillest them. So you are the agent of order that controls chaos. That's basically what it means. Yeah? Thou hast broken Rahab in pieces. What? As one that is slain, thou hast scattered thine enemies with thy strong arm. What? What is this? The heavens are thine, the earth is also thine. As for the world and the fullness thereof, thou hast founded them. So yeah, these verses are basically talking about the creation of the world. There is no denying, right? Though you create the world and you have founded it. Psalm 89, 9, 11. And you say, well, what is this Rahab here? Rahab actually in Old Hebrew means the great sea monster. Out of all things, there is hidden, not hidden because it's in plain sight, but it's buried in the Bible. You have God wrestling with some great sea monster. You say, no, but this is just a coincidence. Like you're really messing with us. Well, even Dore, wonderful. He has wonderful illustrations, especially about the comedy from Dante. The illustrations of Dore are magnificent. I can bring a book to you and you can see an actual print from the time. So here we have God now wrestling some sort of serpent. What about these verses? Thou didst divide the sea by thy strength. All right, so we're seeing this. He's the agent of order. Thou breakest the heads of the dragons in the water. Okay, there's no going around here. There's something that's not working here. They say, thou breakest the heads of Leviathan in pieces and gavest him to be meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness. Wow. And this is, again, Psalm 74. Needless to say, the book of Psalms is older than the book of Genesis. Now, as I say, I have no way to prove this to you physically or mathematically. But does it make sense that the people who wrote these verses knew about the stories of creation of the Babylonians, yeah? And they incorporated it into their own creed because there's nothing divine about this. And I'm going to be serious. There's nothing divine about this. Obviously, there are ideas that are more popular than others. And some religions, some creeds, some mythologies, they understand that they portray a very powerful message and they decide to incorporate them into their own stories. That's what it's called a meme, yeah, that Richard Dawkins actually, now we know memes as the funny images on the internet, but a meme is much more than that. It's a story that propagates itself throughout human culture throughout the years, because they are very powerful stories. So these are very powerful stories, that the world is created out of chaos, that there is an initial serpent. But then, of course, the creator of the book of Genesis, yeah, once they are formalizing their religion, etc., well, he thinks, well, these stories, actually, I do not like them because they don't tie in so well to my image of an absolute God that holds ultimate power. If he has to wrestle someone, does it mean that his power is being shadowed by someone else? No, this doesn't work well with my religion, yeah? So the book of Genesis just tells you that there is an absolute God and he's number one, yeah? But deep inside the Bible, there are these stories still. And I find it fascinating. I find it fascinating to see. It's exactly what we have studied. The story of Tiamat and the serpent, Leviathan. I mean, we are talking about the same thing, you know? So as I say, even if my explanation is not 100% demonstrable, it makes much more sense, and it does a good job at explaining what we read than just to say, well, God just put these stories in our head, and this common thread is being created by God. No, there is a much more simple explanation. People like these stories, so they put it in a book. That's it. And it makes sense, yes? It makes sense. And they are very interesting stories, as I say, but I don't see anything divine about it. I see the evolution of culture. Yeah? So I hope you like this, yeah? Where we saw the waters of chaos buried deep inside the Bible. Right, so now we're going to create the world, okay? And if you remember, Marduk creates the world out of Tiamat, basically rips her apart, etc. And then the Greeks thought that no, different gods account for different features of the world. Like, for example, Helios flying the chariots with the sun, etc. And then the creation of the world of the Nordic peoples, basically, they rip Ymir, the giant Ymir, apart, and we saw how this was in relation to Wotan. It was a quite violent cult, yeah, in north of Germany. Right, so the creation of the world here, what's going on? So we see here, the first thing that we're told is that God said, let there be light, and there was light. The story, when you read the Bible, so the first chapter of the Bible, you will see that this story of creation is very ceremonial. Yeah? So the person or persons who wrote this, they are just listing, like, God can do this and that and that and that, and it's not much of a story. Yeah? So you will see a lot of statements like this. And God said, no, we see that he speaks through the word, and he sees that the light, it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. So light was good. We're slowly but steadily moving from mythos to logos. Because light is good. It's good. For you, for me, for everyone else. It means that we have to be like the light. Yeah? So he's a moral being. Okay? That's basically what it's telling us. That he knows how to distinguish light from darkness. It's very clear that light is good. Of course. We talked about this in the Greek mythology as well. Darkness scares us, yeah? For some reason that we don't understand. Darkness scares us. Of course we do understand now, yeah? But we have to have a way to explain all of this. And he says, and God called the light day, and he called the darkness, he called night. Okay, that's Genesis 1. Then, of course, we have also been talking about this for many lectures. One of the obvious features of our landscape is that the world is flat. Of course, the world is flat. And there is a crystal dome on top of us. So where does this come from? They say, and God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters. Again, still talking about the waters. And let it divide the waters from the waters. It means, yeah, the original chaos, no, as we said, it's not surprising, it's water, so we divide basically the two realms of existence, yeah? Remember that in the Babylonian mythology, they had mixed the waters together, yeah, the two demons, so he is able to separate them, God. Now he's saying, and God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. Firmament, yes, firmament. Firmament, I mean, if you look at the etymology, it means that it's firm, it's unmovable, right? Because we see what? We see the sun moving across the sky. We see the planets moving every other week or month. It's noticeable how they move across the sky. But there is a patch of sky, right, that doesn't move. The stars are always fixed there. The firmament, right? And he called the firmament heaven. So God decided that it was so. But what I want to ask you is the firmament actually static? They didn't have any way of knowing this. They didn't have any way of knowing this, but the firmament is everything but firm. The constellations move. But on a time scale that is not human. So, of course, I mean, these are words written by humans. Human beings live what? At most 100 years. Look at the timescales that I have here, 50,000 BC. Look at the Big Dipper, how it changes. Yeah. Look at Orion. Yeah. So not quite a firmament. Yeah. The stars have apparent motion that humans cannot distinguish, but our instruments can, actually. When we launch telescopes into the near-Earth orbit, you can basically measure the redshift of these stars and measure very, very, very small changes, yeah, in their trajectories that allow us to have images such as this one, yeah? The firmament. The firmament actually moves. It's not static. Look at all the stars. Look at the timescales also. They are huge timescales, okay? Why am I mentioning this? Because I want us to be very aware of the cosmic perspective. We are in this planet out of trillions of planets, out of hundreds of billions. The Milky Way itself has around 400 billion stars. Yeah? To say that the world was created just for us, in this manner, in this time, it's so provincial. Look at the scale of what we have. Not only that, but then if you push the argument a bit forward, you understand that the sun itself may be one star in a constellation that other intelligent beings might have drawn in the sky. Like, for example, here is Sirius. This is the sky that you would see from Sirius, and the sun is here, the Sol here. We don't know of any planets in Sirius, but the sun may be part of one of their constellations, one of the constellations of any intelligent beings living there. Or from, this is Alpha Centauri, the nearest star, 4 light years away. The sun is here, yeah? So what I want you to imagine is what kinds of stories may have intelligent beings living here have come up with, right? Do they also have constellations? And I have actually been a little bit creative, and I call this the cosmic salamander, or or should I say the cosmic mouse? I don't know. The point that I'm trying to make again is that the cosmos is large, is very large, and if there are intelligent beings, they may have also looked at the stars, they may have also come up with their own stories. Remember that divine, the etymology of divine comes from divinare, yeah? To predict, yeah? Divinare, why? Because the stars predict the changing of the seasons and when we have to harvest and our crops, etc., etc., etc. Yeah, so maybe these people living in not people, but intelligent beings living in Alpha Centauri, when they see the salamander rising from the sky, they know that it's the time to harvest whatever they have. Yeah, the cosmic perspective, very important. Yeah, I hope it helps to understand how they are imaginative stories, of course, but to me they are very provincial. Yeah. These people might have gods also, yeah, of their own. So we continue with the creation of the world. Here I have some picture from Hans Gude, Baalestron. This is in the Oslo Museum. Fantastic picture. Right, we have the waters create, basically he makes the land appear, and I'm saying he because it's understood, of course, that at the top of the cosmical hierarchy there is a man, of course, and let the land appear, yeah? So the land appears, and the earth brings forth grass, and he also says, well, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven, and let the waters bring forth fish, cattle, birds, etc. And all of these sentences end with the sentence, and God saw that it was good. So he wants to do it, and he thinks that it is good. Now remember that he created night and day, but there were no sun or moon to understand that night and day were different things. So Yeah, these are Genesis, third day, fourth day, fifth day, and sixth day. Well, my point to this is that he seemed like he had a little bit of a rush. He created the world in 6 days, basically. Maybe he could have taken some more days and do it a little better, actually. And so get rid ourselves of sickness and all of these things, right? And then what happens is that in this story of creation also, he creates the Garden of Eden, and he plants something in the middle of the garden. What can we guess? A tree. Yeah, he plants a tree. Out of all of these plants, he plants a tree, and that's the tree of morality, of good and evil. We will not go into that because, as I say, that's maybe part of the next step. Yeah, of our. Now we're just talking about the stories of creation, but that's the tree of morality, basically. And then what happens? He rests on the seventh day from all the work which he had made. 7. Interesting number. Why 7? What's the point with 7? If you remember when I told you about, for example, Ishtar going down to hell, she has to cross 7 gates. Yeah. The number 7 in the Babylonian mythology is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Number 7. It was very important for them. 7, 7, 7 here, 7 there, 7, 7, 7. What's the deal with 7? I talked about this before. I don't think this is coincidental. I think this has a much deeper meaning, much obvious meaning. That doesn't have to do with God himself saying that he wanted to create the world in 7 days, but rather something much more empirical. Count the number of heavenly bodies that you can see with the naked eye. Yeah? Say Mercury, Venus, the Moon, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and the Sun. 7. Yeah? 7. And remember what I told you in the Greek cosmogony, that these are the only things in the sky that can move freely. So they also, of course, they don't have these names for nothing. Mercury doesn't have this name for nothing. Mercury is not the messenger of the gods for nothing, because it's the planet with the highest angular speed. Yeah, so it goes around the sun the fastest, yeah, angularly speaking. So it's the fastest going around the sun, then Venus, etc., etc. So, of course, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, 7 days, 7 days. Very important for the Babylonians. Then we have the creation of humankind. Can we guess what God is going to use to create humankind once again? Yeah. Clay, again, and I'm reusing the picture from Prometheus because that's basically it, right? And God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. Wait a second. Let us. Who? You and who else? You and who else? Who is he talking about? Because we have seen that God basically says all the time, let there be light, let the earth, no? Let the animals, let the vegetation. But here specifically they say, let us. And you go to the Hebrew translation, so the Hebrew text itself, and yes, this is not a problem with the King James Bible. It actually says, let us. Yeah? Who? Do you remember the story of the Babylonians, the creation of the world by the Babylonians and the creation of mankind, of humankind by the Babylonians? It was actually Ea and someone else, Mami, his wife, let's say. Yeah? So it's 2 gods that create man and woman actually, with 7 pieces of clay. Yeah? Can it be, I'm just posing the idea here, can it be that maybe this is an echo also of the Babylonian creation where 2 gods are involved? Who knows? but I find it very interesting. Yeah. He says, "And the Lord God formed man out of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul." Very unoriginal. We have seen this before. Yeah. So of course it's a recurring theme. Yeah. Man out of clay, right? And then the breath of life. And in these societies, women, needless to say, didn't have so many rights as man had, so of course she has to come from man, yeah? Because that's the hierarchy. That's how it works, right? Then, if you remember also, I told you that there is another story of the creation of mankind by the Babylonians. There is this Atrahasis story, right? The flood story. We talked about the flood story in the previous lecture, right? This was also intentional because, of course, you can see in the Genesis that there is a flood story and Noah is the usual suspect, right? Basically, God says these people are living way too long and I need to send them a flood, actually. And in the Babylonian story, after Atrahasis survives, then people are mortal, so they live a few decades, right? Well, look at what I have done here. I haven't done it myself, but there are charts online. These are the ages of the people of the Bible characters. So we start with Adam here, lives around 900 years. Enoch maybe tripped himself and fell down a cliff, I don't know. Then you have Methuselah, etc. So let's focus on Noah. Noah here, around 950. Noah survives the flood, and then what happens? Oh, surprise, surprise. People start living much less, significantly much less, in line with the Babylonian story, yeah, when people become mortals. Yeah. Here, surprise, happens exactly the same. As I say, I cannot prove it to you 100%, but these stories seem to me that they were very much written by normal people, intelligent people that knew about previous stories and they liked it pretty much. This chart is unequivocal, right? Okay, so this is the story of the world. I just want to recapitulate here. We have seen how the book of Genesis was written after the Babylonian captivity. And what is another aspect of the book of Genesis that is also quite famous? The Tower of Babel, right? The Tower of Babel. And they don't like the Babylonians all too much. I wouldn't like them either. So they sent us, they exiled us, they destroyed our temple, and they sent us to Babylon. And there is this very, very short chapter, right, in the book of Genesis that talks about how God, basically punishes all of these people with 1,000 tongues, and Babylon is basically the city of sin. Well, you wouldn't blame them, okay? This is why I'm saying that the book of Genesis is written after the Babylonian captivity, okay? So this idea doesn't come out of nowhere. But when they were in Babylon also, I told you that Cyrus, the Persian king, liberates them. Yeah? And the Persian king was didn't believe in the god Marduk, etc. He was a Zoroastrian. So he believed in another god, Mazda. Well, sorry, Mazda. Actually, Mazda. It is because of Ahura Mazda. Okay. Zoroastrianism started as a religion. It's still ongoing. The religion is much older than Judaism, yeah? And it's the first religion that we know of. Happy to be fact-checked here, but it's the first religion that we know of that has one God. There is all good and there is all wisdom, yeah? And that's the God that Cyrus, the liberator of the Jews, believed in. And this is Ahura Mazda with the wings. So we will study the Zoroastrian God actually in a couple of lectures, right? Because as I say, we're moving into the Logos. Ahura Mazda is all good, so if we want to be good, we need to be like Ahura Mazda. And Ahura Mazda also, he tells something to Zarathustra, Zoroaster, that is very interesting, that there is an eschatology. Yeah? There is life after death. And that's really the first written eschatology that we have that talks about this, yeah? Good and evil. Just an epilogue. I don't want to bother you too much more. Just an epilogue, myth and reason. Here we have one of the only old pictures that I found of Origen, Orígenes, yeah? in Greek, Origen. Origen was one of the fathers of the church. And at the beginning, they really liked him, but then they anathematized him and they say that he wrote too many heresies, and then they liked him again. Okay, so basically, he's a very in the adolescence of Christianity. He writes, okay, and this is something that I know it's a bit long, but I'm going to try to. I mean, he says, "Now who is there, pray, possessed of understanding, that will regard the statement as appropriate, that the first day and the second and the third, in which also both evening and morning are mentioned, existed without sun," as I told you. So God creates the day and night, but he doesn't create any sun, and moon and stars. The first day even without a sky. Who could believe this? Yeah? But he doesn't stop here. And who is found so ignorant as to suppose that God, as if he had been a husbandman, planted trees in paradise, as if it was a Sunday morning, right? In spring, planted trees in paradise in Eden towards the east. And he says, no one, I think, can doubt that the statement that God walked in the afternoons in paradise and that Adam lay hid under a tree is related figuratively in Scripture. Yeah? That some mystical meaning may be indicated to it. What is he saying? He's telling us that no one in its sane mind would understand that these stories are reality, that these are tales. These are tales. That is what he's telling us. Sorry. That is what he's telling us. Yeah? Well, what Origen is writing was writing 1,800 years ago, more or less, still relevant today. Because there are people, especially in the US, I don't know what are the numbers of the percentage of creationists, yeah? But it's more than 30 or 40% for sure. Yeah? There are people who believe these stories literally, and that's the problem. But then there is another problem, which is to say, well, these are only fairy tales. Everything else is true. Well, if these stories are figurative, and there's no indication that they need to be taken as poetry, no? As the title of these lectures is poetry, then what is, right? How can I distinguish what is poetry from what is fact? It's very difficult, yeah? So we enter into murky territory, because when we will be talking about morality and the morality handed down by God in the Bible, what do we need to take literally and what not? Who decides that? And isn't that the very essence of cherry picking? Picking what I think is good for me, picking what I think is bad for me, right? And this problem is not unique to Christianity, Judaism, of course, Christianity and Islam. They have these problems. How can I know what is the word of God from what is mere tale? It gets very serious when we talk about if we need to punish women, if we need to punish the homosexuals, if we need to eat pig or not. It gets serious there. So I'm just posing the problem right now. Yeah? Very, very curious. And just to end the presentation here, I just wanted to mention something that maybe I will deal with in the next lecture. Actually, it is natural for human beings to believe that what is out there has been designed, because we live in a world where a chair does not appear out of nowhere. Yeah? This chair is clearly designed, so someone can sit on it and will hold the weight and will be actually comfortable. Okay? This is a design thing. So we are the designers, right? It is not complicated to think that all of these people, they didn't have a scientific method with which to probe into the reality of the world. So of course they thought that the cosmos, the complexity of the cosmos, just the complexity of the eye, that has been designed, right? So there has to be some sort of watchmaker that makes all of this. Because otherwise, how do you explain the complexity, right? But in the next lecture, I will say it later, we will deal with all of this. What does religion tell us? That you just need to believe. Do you know the story of St. Thomas in the Gospel? Do you know the story? Basically, Jesus resurrects, right? He resurrects and he meets the apostles again. And when he meets the apostles, there is one of them, St. Thomas, that says, "No, you're not. How? You couldn't resurrect. No one comes back from the dead." Yeah, it's like, show me some proof that you're Jesus. Yeah, and he says, "Well, look for yourself." Yeah, and he sees the stigmas here, the holes, and he sees the hole here of the wound that basically killed him, right? And he says, "Oh, he looks in Caravaggio, masterful, yeah, at depicting this scene. You can see here, Thomas, very curious. He puts his finger into the wound and says, oh, okay, now I believe you." And what does Jesus reply? He replies, "You see, you need to just believe. You need to just believe." But we have to do this completely the opposite. Because if we just believe in unfalsifiable stories, then we can't believe anything, yes? Why does the book of Genesis have a higher claim to truth than the Babylonians? Why do they have a higher claim to truth than the Romans? We even have a day that is called Saturday for the god Saturn, yes? Saturn seems to me like a very powerful god. He even has a day, just like God, the Sunday, yeah? The god of the day of the Lord, yeah? Why? Because these gods come and go, and different traditions appear and disappear, and of course we all think ourselves as being very important because we live in this very particular place and time, and any Arabic person that was born in Saudi Arabia, they feel that Allah is the only God because they were born no. But anyone, if this person would be able to argue with a person from the 12th century Norway, then they would have a conversation and they would say, well, absolutely not, it's Thor, don't you see it, the thunder, the lightning, I have all of these proofs for you. It's a very provincial mindset, yes? There are many other ways of relating to this. And you may say, well, my God is the ultimate God, whatever it is, yeah? Then I say, well, I also have an ultimate God. My God is a pink unicorn living in the forest in Sweden. I said, but that's ridiculous. Why? Can you prove me wrong? Can you prove me wrong? I said, well, no. Then, I mean, I don't have any tangible proof that your God exists, whatever it is. There's nothing that makes any sort of prediction, nothing at all. Then mine is as valid as yours, right? Because that's the problem. That's a very profound logical fallacy. You cannot prove a negative. You cannot prove it. It doesn't make any sense. If I tell you that there is, as Bertrand Russell put it, right? If there is a teapot going around the earth, and I say there is a teapot going around the earth, oh no. Well, prove that there is no teapot. It's impossible. You cannot do it. So the logic of religion is unfalsifiable, and that's its problem. Yeah? Your belief is based on something that you cannot falsify. You cannot prove right. You cannot prove wrong. It's a cycle. So we will talk about all of this in the futures. And the only thing that I wanted to mention is that in the next lecture, preliminarily Thursday, 18th of January at 6, we will talk about the actual story of creation. We have been talking about the tales, wonderful tales, poetry, and we see it, poetry rhymes in history, right? But what is the real deal? What is the real deal? What is the real story? And that's when we will talk about Kepler, we will talk about Newton, we will talk about Darwin, Einstein, and I will try to make it fun for everyone with science experiments also. I will try to prove to you that gravity does not depend on the mass of the object that is falling. I will try to show you also how supernovas work and what are we made of. And this connection that we seek with the cosmos, that religion promises to us, the story, the real story, according to the evidence that we have until now, is much more remarkable. That's going to be the moral of the story, is that the real deal is much more interesting than fiction. And with this, I finished this series of lectures on the creation of the world. I hope you liked it.